His name is Avram Tori, and he says he has a mission in life, in his words, to put the mark of Cain on Helmut Rauch. His arsenal is this incredible file, thousands of pages of diaries, documents, hundreds of photographs, the complete record for the prosecution of Helmut Rauch. The scene is Kaunas, Lithuania, a peaceful city in the 1930s where Jews lived freely, and young Avram Tori became president of the Jewish student fraternity. With the arrival of the Nazis, Jews were herded into a ghetto, 30,000 people living behind barbed wire in a space big enough for 8,000. They lived on food rations of 120 grams of bread a day, and daily those who were fit and able to work went off to become slave labor on Nazi projects. Everything was routinely recorded on the second floor of a building where Avram Tori worked as deputy secretary for the Jewish Elders Council. Although unknown gunmen took potshots at the ghetto, life continued without undue terror until Rauch appeared. In August of 1941, the young, elegant SS commander, Helmut Rauch, suddenly ordered 500 well-dressed men to report for special work.
534 academicians were mobilized allegedly for archive works instead of slavery work. And Rauch immediately ordered on the lorries, and when everybody was on the lorries, he gave the command, and they went away.
The Jewish intellectuals were shot at a Nazi fortress, according to Lithuanian witnesses. Only 2 months later, the entire population of the ghetto was ordered to report here, Democratic Square. They were terrified, but they couldn't know that Rauch would personally select 10,000 old, sick, and young Jews to die.
It was dark. It was 6 o'clock in the morning on the 28th of October. It's winter in Lithuania. People went with the little candles in order to see their way from their homes to the square. This is the spot where the mass murderer Rauch stood on the 28th of October, and with his finger lift selected the people left, right, left. To the right is to bad side, and to the left side was the good side. He was cynic. He was cynic. He was just staying, smiling, with one end keep a sandwich and eat, with the other side, and all kinds of remarks, cynical remarks, like saying a Misthaufen, a group of garbage. It was a terrible sight, a terrible people, and they started fainting, and when you hear the fainting of hundreds, sometimes of thousands, fainting, knowingly that they are going to an unknown destiny.
Rauch's 10,000 victims were marched off to a Nazi fortress and never seen again.
Define the personality of Helmut Rauch.
Helmut Rauch is a mass murderer. He is no human, is not a human being, he has no soul. Can you imagine a man that stands from 6 in the morning to 5 and just selecting people, sending to death? He knew where he was sending him. In the same time smiling or making dirty jokes or cynic remarks and eating a sandwich. And see to it that his hands should not be, by the sandwich, should not be fat. So he had his handkerchiefs, white handkerchief, and also a serviette of paper. Shotchas v'cholila. God forbid his hands should not be with the fat of the sandwich. At the same time sending thousands of people to death. Even I have written it, I have put it in writing. with the very sole purpose that even if we don't survive, the generations to come should know.
Torrey risked his life and that of a boy who helped him to keep his record safe, even though Rauka ordered all books collected and destroyed. He and his wife carried those documents on their escape from Lithuania, and now, if called, they'll go to Rauka's trial in Germany to fulfill Torrey's life mission. George Wolf, Global News, Tel Aviv.
A Canadian court rules that this man should be sent to West Germany to stand trial for crimes committed during the Second World War. Tonight, based on evidence and on the court proceedings, we look at the story of Albert Helmut Rauka, accused by the West German government of killing 11,000 Lithuanian Jews.
And we look at the implications of this historic court case. Why did it take 10 years to bring it to trial? How did the Constitution affect the case? And how will it affect hundreds of others living in Canada who are accused of crimes committed during World War II?
The Journal, with Mary Lou Finley and Peter Kent.
Legal history was made in Canada today. For the first time, a Canadian court has cooperated with an attempt to try a Canadian citizen who's charged with committing crimes during the Nazi occupation of Europe.
As you saw in the National tonight, this man, Albert Helmut Rauka, is charged by the government of West Germany with the murder of more than 11,000 Lithuanian Jewish men, women, and children during World War II. Today's decision by the Supreme Court of Ontario does not convict Mr. Rauka of any alleged crimes. What it does say is there is enough evidence to commit him to stand trial in West Germany.
CBC journalist Saul Littman was in court for the 2 days of hearings last month in Toronto. He bases this report on the testimony and affidavits filed during the court proceedings. The Rauka case, prepared by Saul Littman, begins in Germany in 1939.
1939, the German army is poised for war. Hitler tells the German people they're supermen, a master race destined to rule the world. The Jews, he says, are parasites. They must be eliminated like vermin. In a speech to the German parliament, he declares war on the Jews and promises their destruction.
Wenn es dem internationalen Finanzjudentum in und außerhalb Europas gelingen sollte, die Völker noch einmal in einen Weltkrieg zu stürzen, dann wird das Ergebnis nicht die Bolschewisierung der Erde und damit der Sieg des Judentums sein, sondern die Vernichtung der jüdischen Rasse in Europa.
Little does the world realize how quickly and ruthlessly he means to keep his promise. June 20th, 1941, Operation Barbarossa. The German war machine falls upon the Soviet Union. Within days, the Wehrmacht captures the Baltic states. Within weeks, Hitler commands Eastern Europe. Following behind the advancing troops come special task forces called Einsatzgruppen. Their task, to pacify civilians and kill Jews. Recruited largely from the Gestapo SS, the Einsatzgruppen serve as mobile killing units in Hitler's plan to exterminate all of Europe's Jews. This historic film, taken by a German sailor on shore leave, shows the Jews of Libau, Latvia, herded onto trucks, driven to the edge of mass graves, and shot. The case against Helmut Rauka begins here in Kaunas, Lithuania. Here on October 28, 1941, 9,200 Jewish men, women, and children were slaughtered in a single day. Kaunas was an important industrial center with a pre-war population of 128,000. It included a vigorous Jewish community of 26,000, one of the oldest in the Baltic states. The German army entered Kaunas on June 27, 1941. Within days, there was random slaughter of Jews in the streets. Within weeks, the Jews were herded into a narrow, crowded ghetto. It was sealed off with guards and barbed wire. On October 28, 1941, all Jews were ordered to assemble in what was ironically called Democracy Square. They were told they would be divided in two work groups, but the Jews knew it would really be a selection, that some would be chosen to die. Survivors of that day's deadly selection, men like Dr. Abraham Torrey, have testified that the man in charge of the selection was SS Master Sergeant Helmut Rauka.
There stood Rauka and was, as the soloist, looking at the big audience, as you can see in a Greek tragedy, a scene, 29, 30,000 people expecting their destiny. They don't know what does this day bring to them.
Journalist Yakov Rabinovich now lives in Montreal. He also survived that horrifying day.
The person in charge of the selection commandeered right, left, and he divided mothers from children, children from mothers, husbands from wives, parents from children, and so on. He split, and there was a confusion. Nobody knew which is the good side, which is the left side.
I have seen Rauka all the day of the 28th of October, standing at this more or less 8 or 10 meters from him, together with the head of the Jewish community of the ghetto. And I saw him all the time, right, left.
It lasted 7-8 hours till dusk, when the whole selection was finished. By that time, he took away over 10,000 people.
Not less than 10,000 people he selected and took them out to the smaller part of the ghetto, and therefrom they were taken straight to the nice fortress the next day early in the morning.
This is Fort 9, where the warrant of apprehension alleges the 9,200 people selected by Rauka were lined up before a mass grave and shot. Their bodies remained in the frozen ground over the winter. In spring, they were dug up again and heaped on logs and burned. This is a picture of the man 5 eyewitnesses allege is SS Master Sergeant Helmut Rauka, Jewish affairs specialist for Einsatzkommando 3A, stationed in Kaunas. Given the enormity of the charges, it must seem strange that events which took place 41 years ago should only come to trial now. Why did it take so long? It must be remembered that the first wave of Nuremberg war trials dealt only with the top Nazi leaders. It took years before the prosecutors investigated the lower ranks. It wasn't until 1961 that the West German prosecutor issued a warrant for the arrest of SS Master Sergeant Helmut Rauka. It wasn't until 1971 that they realized he might be in Canada. It would then take the RCMP 10 years to locate him. The search for Nazi war criminals begins here in the Office for the Investigation of National Socialist Crimes in Ludwigsburg, West Germany. Here information from around the world is filed and cross-filed. Maps show the location of Nazi death camps. Tables of organization trace the Einsatzgruppen's chain of command. Large maps trace the advance of the Einsatzgruppen through Eastern Europe. West German public prosecutor Willy Dressen has led the search for many war criminals.
The informations come from all over the world, from governments, from Jewish organizations, from organizations of former prisoners of concentration camps, also from individuals as Simon Wiesenthal, maybe in Vienna, from all parts of the world.
Ironically, the most detailed information comes from the Nazis' own records. In the U.S. National Archives is a copy of the monthly regimental report of the unit in which Master Sergeant Helmut Rauka served.
This is the report of Einsatzgruppe A, the mobile commando operating in the Baltic states. And here is an annexed chart annexed to the report, which shows the body count, and by this they mean Jews, no question about it, in the Baltic countries, where Einsatzkommando 3 was in the area of Cowan or Kovno. They show a body count as of October 25th, 1941 of 31,994.
And back in Germany, these records reveal that the authorities first issued a warrant for the arrest of a Master Sergeant Helmut Rauke in 1961. They further revealed that a man by that name, listed as a farm laborer, had emigrated to Canada in 1951 aboard the Beaver Bray. In 1956, a man of the same name applied for and received his Canadian citizenship while living in Kitchener. This photograph, taken in Huntsville, accompanied his passport application in 1973. Here in Huntsville, he was co-owner and resident manager of this modest hotel just over the bridge on Highway 60. Before that, he worked as a farm laborer, bricklayer, stock clerk, and short-order cook. But his longest stay was his 15 years at the motel. Despite this, he's scarcely known in this neighborly town. Rauke, it said, kept his distance from the other motel keepers and avoided Huntsville's flourishing German-Canadian community.
We call him here Albert. And he was a quiet person. He tried to avoid any acquaintance. And if I asked him for something, if he got any vacancies, it was just question no. There was no other explanation whatsoever.
We came up in '62, and he already had the motel next door.
What sort of man was he?
Kept to himself. All you heard was good morning, good evening, and that was the extent of it. He never mixed with anyone.
He retired from the motel business in 1973 and went to live in this tidy house in North Toronto. By then, the German government had traced him to Canada and asked the RCMP to locate him. But incredibly, it took the Mounties another 10 years to find him. Incredible because Rauke was a naturalized Canadian citizen. He held a Canadian passport, which he renewed several times under his own name. He also had a social insurance number. As a businessman, he would have had to file income tax returns. He held a valid Ontario driver's license. This is what the Mounties blame: government computers. Immigration failed to come up with his name because of a minor difference in spellings. Health and Welfare found him on their list of pensioners, but wouldn't tell the RCMP where he lived. The Ontario Transport Computer couldn't see the similarity between Albert Helmut and Helmut Albert Rauke. But Canadian Jewish Congress lawyer Bert Raphael says more than the computers were at fault.
Well, we heard that the Mounties could not find Rauke because of the computer foul-up. And I just think that's a very poor excuse that shows the lack of desire to prosecute war criminals in general. I think if the government wanted them, they could have found them, as they can find others if they're motivated properly.
It took 41 years, but today a Canadian court ruled that Rauke be handed over for trial by the West German government. In the past, there may have been no fire in the government's belly to prosecute the 1,000 or so Nazi war criminals living in Canada. But Solicitor General Robert Kaplan did order the RCMP to make the Rauke case a top priority. Because Rauke's lawyers never contested the evidence submitted against him, the only issue that remained was Canada's Constitution. They argued that our new Charter of Rights makes it unconstitutional to extradite a Canadian citizen. Today's decision by Chief Justice Evans denies that argument. The Constitution cannot be used as a shield against legal extradition. Rauke's lawyers say they will appeal all the way to the Supreme Court of Canada. If their appeal succeeds, we will, in all likelihood, have witnessed Canada's first and last war crimes proceeding. But if Rauke is extradited, the Justice Department has 100 similar cases it's eager to bring forward. In Toronto, this is Saul Littman for The Journal.
When we return, we look at the legal implications of the Rauke case. We'll hear from noted criminal lawyer Ed Greenspan and from Erwin Cutler, professor of law at McGill University. We'll be back after this. The case against Albert Helmut Rauke, accused of murdering more than 11,000 Jews in Europe, was brought by West Germany under its extradition treaty with Canada. The court ruling today could open the way for more extradition requests. But Jewish groups in Canada say there are hundreds of other alleged Nazi war criminals living here, and they want them prosecuted by the Canadian justice system.
Joining us now in the studio are two legal experts. Erwin Kotler is president of the Canadian Jewish Congress and a law professor at McGill University. Ed Greenspan is one of Canada's leading criminal lawyers. Mr. Kotler, let me begin by asking you whether groups like the Canadian Jewish Congress will take heart from today's judgment in the Rauka case.
Well, I think they will take heart to the extent that, number one, the case showed that suspected Nazi war criminals can indeed be extradited, and number two, on a more general level, that the remedy of extradition has stood the test of the Charter. So I think this is an important precedent with respect to any further initiatives of this kind. At the same time, I think that we will regard, and I think lawyers generally might regard, the matter of extradition as being, while an appropriate remedy, nonetheless a limited remedy. It does not catch all those other suspected Nazi war criminals in Canada whose extradition may not be sought, or even if it is sought, Canada either legally or politically may not respond to the extradition request. So we believe that there are alternate legal remedies that should be exercised to bring all suspected Nazi war criminals to justice. In a word, it's almost scandalous that it took 36 years to finally have a legal process involving a suspected Nazi war criminal. That somebody could have gained entry into this country, secured citizenship, remained immune from any legal prosecution for 36 years is, in my opinion, a seething indictment of our own legal process and our commitment to our international legal obligations.
Okay, well, the excuse that has been used for many of those years is that, in fact, if you were to pursue suspected war criminals and hunt them down to the ground, what would you then do with them? People argued that we had no legal framework. We couldn't extradite them, we had no courts. Is that true? I mean, where do we stand?
Well, I believe that we, in fact, did not have a legal framework in this country. We had an act called the Geneva Conventions Act, which was passed in 1949, that has no application to anything that happened before 1949. We have the War Crimes Act that was passed in 1946 that many people have argued could apply to war criminals, but I'm of the view that that act is highly questionable in its application to war criminals in the case of people that committed crimes against humanity. But there was nothing that stopped Parliament from passing an independent act that would apply to specifically to war criminals. There's nothing that prohibits retroactive legislation to catch somebody in this country who's suspected of committing thousands of murders. And why Parliament acted, I think, is a very important question. But the Charter of Rights now that was passed on April 17th of this year specifically provides for Parliament to pass an act to try the war criminals in this country. There is no doubt about that.
Well, do we need to pass an act, though? I mean, you say that the Canadian War Crimes Regulations and the Geneva Convention don't apply. When I read about them, and not in legal terms, I see that we are supposed to pursue war criminals and bring them to trial. Is it because the definition of war criminal has changed that that doesn't apply? Well,
I think that they are appropriate legal remedies. I would agree with Eddie that if there are alleged deficiencies, we could certainly enact a new law, and Section 11G of the Charter was intended to, in fact, ensure that retroactivity would not be a bar to prosecution. But even leaving that aside, and in fact, in some sense related to the War Crimes Act, the War Crimes expressly is intended to be retroactive from the time that Canada ended the Second World War in September 1939. We did, in fact, enforce and apply it and do so successfully immediately after the Second World War. There is legal precedent, therefore, for its application. And the most important part, I think, and you made some reference to it, is that we undertook, as a matter of international law, to investigate, apprehend, arrest, prosecute, and convict any suspected Nazi war criminals in our midst.
I can hear some people who are watching us saying, and I know others are going to throw tomatoes at me for even asking this question, it was 37 years ago. Why should we bring that up again? Why should we go after some sergeant who was following orders, as was the excuse?
Well, my simple answer is this. We have no statute of limitations for murder in this country. We have no statute of limitations for shoplifting in this country if it's done in an amount over $200. Our law has never recognized a statute of limitations on serious criminal offenses, and for that matter, minor criminal offenses.
So our intent is to pursue murderers.
It is absurd to suggest that 37 years after hundreds of thousands and millions of people have been killed, that we should not pursue people. That is not the thrust of the law for the entire history of this country.
I think that the whole notion of the rule of law is that murder must never go unpunished, that the mere passage of time can give immunity from legal process is, I think, a real breach of whatever the rule of law was intended to convey. So it seems to me that the mere passage of time is a comment on our inaction, not on the fact that people should remain immune from legal process. The real issue is one of political will. If the political will is there, Canada can go ahead and enact this new law, just as I believe that if the political will was there, we could have done a number of things, including even remedies such as revocation of citizenship, things that have been done in the United States where we had even a stronger legal foundation to do it here in Canada. The fact that we had to wait till another foreign state made a request until a process of this kind ever came before a Canadian court says something, I think, about our political commitment as distinct really from our legal reasons to do something.
Ed Greenspan, do you think that this will spur any more action on the other cases that we think should be brought to court?
Well, I personally believe that this has been a show trial that the government has assisted the West German government to bring on, that we may not see any more, or maybe one or two more, but that they believe and hope that this case will have the effect of pacifying the hundreds of thousands of Canadians who've been outraged for the last 37 years at the government inaction. They had 37 years to do something and they did nothing. And they finally have done one case, and I don't really have any great hopes that they're going to do many more.
Erwin Kotler and Ed Greenspan, thank you both very much.
When we return, we'll look at the nuclear disarmament ballot in Canada and the grassroots movement started by Operation Dismantle.